So you've probably heard this term BRICS getting thrown around a lot lately, right? Especially when people are debating the global economy and, who's really calling the shots. Today, we're going to dig into what it actually is and why it matters.
Which brings us to the big question we're tackling today. Is this group of countries for real? Are they actually powerful enough to create a whole new financial world order? One that could really challenge the system that's been in place for decades? All right, so let's get into it. First things first, to really get a grip on their influence, we've got to understand what BRICS even is. Where did this thing come from?
So at its heart, BRICS is basically an organization, a club if you will, made up of 5 major economies: Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. Yep, the name is just an acronym of the members. And their goal? Well, pretty simple, to work together on stuff like trade, finance, and international politics.
But the really interesting part is how this all came to be. It wasn't some grand political plan from the start. Actually, back in 2001, it was just an investment term coined by an economist at Goldman Sachs to describe these booming markets. But then, by 2009, the countries themselves thought, hey, this is a pretty good idea, and they made it official with their first summit. South Africa jumped in a year later, and then, get this, just last year they announced a huge expansion, pulling in major energy players. It literally went from an acronym on a report to a real political heavyweight.
Okay, so what does all this mean in terms of actual economic muscle? Well, when you look at the numbers, they are pretty staggering.
First off, let's just talk about people. We're talking more than 40% of the entire world's population living in these countries. Think about that. That is a gigantic engine for both making stuff and buying stuff.
And this is where it gets really wild. If you look at their economic output, not just in dollars, but in what their money can actually buy, something called purchasing power parity. Well, the BRICS bloc has officially overtaken the G7. The club of the big, traditional Western economies. I mean, that is a massive shift in the global balance of power.
And their power isn't just about the size of their economies. It's about what they control. We're talking about the oil and gas from Russia and the Middle East, the rare earth metals from China that are in literally every piece of tech you own, and the huge farms in Brazil and India that feed the world. They basically hold the keys to some of the most critical supply chains on the planet.
So you've got all this economic power. What do you do with it? Well, you start to build your own system. And that leads us to maybe the single biggest goal of the BRICS bloc, taking on the dominance of the US dollar. And make no mistake, this isn't just talk. Their strategy is crystal clear. They are actively building, piece by piece, a kind of parallel financial system. Why? To get away from depending on Western-led institutions like the IMF and the World Bank. So how are they doing it? It's basically a three-pronged attack. First, they built their own bank, the new development bank, to fund their own projects their own way. Second, they're trying to trade with each other directly using their own currencies, skipping the whole convert to dollar step. And third, the really ambitious one, they're actually talking about creating a whole new shared currency just for the BRICS countries. Look, at the end of the day, this whole de-dollarization thing, it's not really just about money. It's a huge geopolitical statement. It's their way of saying they want a world with many powers, a multipolar world, not one that's just dominated by the US.
Okay, but it's not that simple. For all this big talk and ambition, the BRICS group has some serious cracks under the surface, real problems that could derail the whole project. So the question is, are they a unified force or more like a house divided against itself?
And wow, this chart right here tells you almost everything you need to know. Just look at it. China's economy isn't just the biggest slice of the pie, it is pretty much the entire pie. It's bigger than all the other members put together. That creates let's say, a huge power imbalance inside the group. And that's just problem number one. You've also got deep-seated rivalries, right? I mean, India and China have major tensions and border issues. Plus, all these countries have their own separate goals and friends on the world stage, and they don't always line up. And maybe most importantly, unlike something like NATO or the EU, there's no treaty that forces them to act together. It's all kind of voluntary.
So all this leads to a lot of skepticism, and this quote nails it really. Is BRICS a unified team, like an orchestra playing the same song? Or is it more of a loose forum, just a place for these big countries to chat and coordinate a bit before going off and doing their own thing anyway?
Okay, so let's bring it all home. We've seen the incredible power and ambition on one side, and the deep divisions on the other. So what's the verdict? Are they really changing the world order? Well, it really boils down to this debate, doesn't it? On one side, the argument is, yes, look at their economic scale. They're building their own banks, they have a vision. But the other side says, hold on, look at the imbalances, the rivalries, the fact that there's nothing really holding them together.
So maybe the answer isn't a simple yes or no. Maybe BRICS isn't going to replace the old system. What we're actually seeing is a diversification of power. It's not all in one basket anymore. Power is spreading out, creating multiple centers of gravity all over the world.
And that leaves us with one final, pretty big thought. Maybe the real story here isn't about a new world order replacing the old one. Maybe it's about the end of the very idea of a single world order. Are we just heading into a future where power is always going to be shared, always up for grabs, and balanced between a bunch of different major players? It's something to think about.